Hi guys, so today's video is going to be both my November and my October wrap up. Jumping right into it, the first book would be The Toll by Neal Shusterman. I finally know it is Shusterman because I partially listened to this on audiobook. Anyway, this is the final book in the Arc of the Scythe trilogy. This is a series that follows a futuristic society where we have conquered death basically in every way, and the only threat to mankind is overpopulation. The cloud has gained sentience. It's known as the Thunderhead. It kind of looks after mankind, and in order to try and keep the world from overpopulating, they have instilled this organization called Scythes, who are people that go around and permanently kill people for a living. The Scythedom, as it's called, is the only thing that is outside of the Thunderhead's jurisdiction. It's basically the only self-governing body left on Earth, and because there is room for human error, there are a lot of controversies going on in the Scythedom. I did a whole trilogy review, and at the end of it, I did some spoiler chats for this. Singular. I did a spoiler chat for this. Overall, I really enjoyed the trilogy. Definitely one of my favorites. I can't wait to read more Neal Shusterman. I was satisfied with the ending. I do feel like the second and third books are far more plot-driven than the first one, which felt the most character-driven of the three. I don't know that any of them ever felt extremely character-driven, but as a trilogy in its entirety, I would say it's more plot-driven than character-driven. That's usually not my cup of tea, but it was pulled off in a way that I very much enjoyed. I really love the way Neal Shusterman takes these topics that can be so kind of, oh, meta, what is life? These kinds of things, and he presents them in a way that I found very accessible and entertaining, but also still made me think. Also, I read The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This is a reread. I would say rereading this, there are certain elements that I found myself gripped by way faster because I knew what was going on. The first time I was reading this, I thought the beginning was so slow because of the fact that it is so unfamiliar to me and there's so much to this world that has to be established. And this time around, I was more familiar with it. I knew who was who. So getting into it, it was just enjoyable. It just felt like coming home. That said, there are some elements. This is a very giant book. It's like 1,000 pages long. There are some elements of it that I find, I don't love everything in these 1,000 pages. There are some things that I wish weren't there. Not anything controversial, just sometimes there's a lot of details and I'm like, I don't really care about all these details. But still, that's like the smallest thing. I love the series. I love Kaladin so much. I loved him just as much this time. There's a character, Dalinar, who has visions, and I still was just as bored by his visions as I was the first time around. I didn't like, there's nothing wrong with them. When characters have visions and we have to be with them for a long time in their visions, after a while I'm like, but it's not reality. I know there's things in it, it's like hidden things that I could look at and try to figure out, or it's telling me something that is gonna come into play later and stuff, but I'm always like, wake up. Those last two books were giant, and this next one is very small. This would be The Queen of Nothing. This is the last book in the Folk of the Air trilogy, the first being Cruel Prince, the second being Wicked King, and I will have a review for the whole trilogy and probably a little bit of spoiler chat for this one soon, but it's not that I was unsatisfied with the ending, it's that it didn't occur the way I was expecting given how things are with the first two. I really want to say why. I want to describe the tone of it and why the tone wasn't what I was expecting, but even to say that I think would be a little bit of a spoiler, so I don't want to say that. But what I will say is that this was very to the point. I never felt like, it was kind of the opposite of Way of Kings. I love Way of Kings and I love good world building, but I was just kind of being a little bit annoying about the fact that there's a lot of detail. And this one, I don't know that there was ever a moment that felt like fluff, which is good because it's 300 pages. So if there had been fluff, that wouldn't have been good. But it was very to the point. The story, we pick up from where the second one left off. We get going, but quite quickly. And I was really excited about that. I do think I would have enjoyed this more had I just kind of binged the whole trilogy, because the second and third one really tie together nicely, I think. But overall, it was still really fun. It felt very fairy tale-like in this third one. I would say even more than the other ones. The events in this one didn't necessarily feel like they were really tied down by the events of the first two. It felt more like the character development from the first two made you understand what was going on with the characters in this third one, but the plot itself felt somewhat isolated. Not in a bad way, just it felt like a fairy tale. The next book. I forgot I'd even read this book until I looked down because I have a list of the books that I've read the past couple months. I forgot I read it until I just looked down, and that's because I think my brain wanted to forget that I'd read it. So, The Bird and the Blade. I read this book in one sitting. Throughout basically the entirety of my reading, I thought this is going to be a new favorite. I can't wait to finish this so I can tell everybody how amazing it was because it was so good. And it never was bad. It's not bad. It's just I hated the ending. And when I say hated, I mean I hated the way the events transpired at the end. So it was purely just a personal thing. But I did not like the ending at all. And so then I was sad. And I think I've just removed it from my brain because it's making me sad thinking about it because I loved it so much. I'm definitely very curious what books that has happened to you for. Spoiler free, of course. Don't tell me, what happened that you didn't like. But I would love to know what books that has happened to you with. And I think because I was loving it so much, it just made this unsatisfying ending for me. It just kind of infuriated me because I was like, dang it, I was liking it so much. Anyway, the premise for the book is that we are in a world, it's our own world, it's a historical fiction, it's not fantasy, and it's a few generations down from Genghis Khan. There's a bit of a power vacuum, claim to the throne sort of thing happening, and we are following the slave to one of the descendants. It is a retelling of an opera. I don't want to say what opera, one, because I'm worried that I would give away stuff if I told you what it was a retelling of, and two, because I don't know how to pronounce the name of it. But it just had so many things that I was enjoying so much. The character work, when you first meet this character, she is very, I hate to say it sounds so awful, but she's fictional. She's very pathetic. She has no self-confidence. She doesn't have any belief in herself, and the guy that she is the slave of, he's like the son, technically, of the person she's the slave of. And he is nice to her. He sees her when she's trying to steal an apple, and instead of telling on her, he gives her the apple, and then he gives her another one. He's super nice. And then from then on, she's like infatuated with this person, and you're like, not a good reason to fall in love, right? That's, I feel like, modern day instinct to apply our girl power thoughts to these sorts of situations. But what I really loved is that as you read the story, you realize this poor girl has just had the worst life ever, and you see how this small act of kindness was the most meaningful thing to her, and that is why that's kind of what started this obsession with this person. And it's a traveling story. Like I said, it's a retelling, historical fiction, depressing, so many things that I was just so eating up, and I just didn't like the ending. But a lot of other people don't seem to dislike the ending, so if anything about the story sounds interesting to you, I would say check it out. Speaking of not liking endings, this one, not so extreme. I didn't hate the ending. I just didn't love everything about the ending. But I read the second and third books of the First Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I did reviews for each of the individual books, so I'll have those linked down below. I also did a trilogy review, and that's where you can find my spoiler chat at the end of that video for this last one. Overall, I would say the second one was by far my favorite. Our story is definitely character driven. The characters are what make this series shine. Oh my gosh, do I love Glocta. I love Glocta so much. And he's so twisted and messed up and really not a good person. I probably should not love him, but I do anyway. This series is grimdark, but if you are somebody who's a little squeamish, you don't usually like grimdark because it's too dark for you, I would say give this a go because it was not what I was expecting. I've read things that aren't considered grimdark that I think are more gratuitous. The second one, though, was my favorite because since the story is so character driven, whenever the characters interact with one another, I loved those scenes. And in the second one, we see a lot of our characters interacting with one another. And so I found it to be so enjoyable, and the growth with the characters through these interactions with these other people was really fantastic to see. I think we had a good balance of character development, character relationship building, and also action scenes. I thought it was a really good amount of that. The first one, I think, was a little bit of a lot of setup, and it took me a while to get into it. Once I did enjoy it. Second one, loved. Third one, there were so many things about the first two, about the magic, about the plot, the world, all these things that were sort of presented to us that I was thinking, I can't believe this is going to be a trilogy, because there's a lot of things I'm not entirely sure what is happening. I don't feel confident in these things like I know them like the back of my hand, and I never did. By the end of the third one, I was thinking we would get a little bit more with certain things. We didn't really, which was fine, and I think for a lot of people, they actually appreciate that. I sound like such a hypocrite after complaining about the amount of detail in Way of Kings, but there are just certain events that didn't go about the way I was hoping. I found that there's a little bit less character communication, and so the characters are kind of more off on their own in a lot of ways. So overall, fantastic trilogy. Absolutely loved it. Can't wait to read more Joe Abercrombie. But this third one, I think this series could have been a little bit longer. The next two books were rereads. I am continuing on with my Cosmere reread with the Second Era Mistborn books. I was surprised because these are not my favorites, the Second Era Mistborn books out of the Cosmere, and I picked this one up. And for those that don't know, you do want to read the original trilogy first. These take place 300 years after the original trilogy. I never loved these as much. They're much shorter. They're kind of a buddy cop situation, almost a Western feel. And I was very pleasantly surprised. I liked this way more the second time around. I think that's because I've had time to accept that the Second Era are very different from the first. I've had time to heal from the end of the first trilogy and not feel so emotionally pulled apart. So when I read this one, I feel like I went into it with much better expectations, and I found I really liked it. Sort of the opposite is happening with Witcher. The series, I still enjoy it. I still love it. I still like the Wild Hunt video game better, which I feel like is taboo to say as a bookworm, but I do. I love the video game so much. And it's not that I think these are bad. It's just the things about Sapkowski's writing that I don't love are highlighted for me this second time around. So he has sometimes really, really long passages following people who are not really main characters, nor are they people that really interact with main characters. We see a lot of conversations between people, and then the result of that conversation will eventually affect our main characters, but I just really don't care about those conversations. And sometimes we spend a lot of time with those things. That's just one example. I still love the series. It's about a monster hunter named Geralt of Rivia. His life is kind of intertwined with a sorceress named Yennefer and a child named Ciri. It's fantastic. I do love it. I just would say upon rereading it, I don't love the books maybe quite the same way. The last book would be The Girl the Sea Gave Back. This is a companion book to Sky in the Deep by the same author. It's a Viking story, so another historical fiction. And I found her writing stunning. It's, like I said, it's very Viking-esque, and the writing is very atmospheric, which was really enjoyable. We follow a character who has kind of been raised by this clan. She has visions, or not visions, but she has feelings. She can kind of see the future in a way, and so they've used her for that, but they also hate her because of her background, and so she's just grown up hated but used. And her clan is going to go to war with another clan, and you get the perspective of the person who's next in line to become chieftain. And so you kind of see how these two people are caught in the middle of this angst between these clans. And like I said, the writing, fantastic. And there's just things about the story that I think maybe if I had read the other book, that I perhaps would have enjoyed this one more. I did enjoy it, but I want this author to write an entire series, and I don't want a standalone or a companion novel. I want an entire series, and I want an entire Viking series from her because I feel like it would be fantastic. That's it for the books that I read in October and November. There are some other books that I am currently reading. I know you guys ask, and I am trying to get to them. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.